Imagine you spend like 13 years meticulously building a military designed to completely rival the United States.
Right, a massive undertaking.
Yeah, exactly. You pour just staggering amounts of sovereign wealth into developing hypersonic missiles. You're launching completely new aircraft carriers and, systematically expanding your nuclear arsenal.
And you're doing all this while handpicking the top-tier generals to oversee that exact technological revolution.
Right. But then, right when the machine is seemingly at its absolute peak, you abruptly purge the very commanders you trusted to build it.
It sounds totally counterintuitive.
It really does. I mean, you remove your most combat-tested, top uniformed commander, so why would the leader of a global superpower deliberately decapitate the military machine they just spent over a decade constructing?
That's the big question.
Welcome to the Doctrine Deep Dive. If you are joining us today, you are likely trying to make sense of the rapidly shifting currents in global power dynamics.
And to figure out why a superpower would break its own operational command, we're pulling from a massive stack of sources today.
We really are. We're dissecting a New York Times article titled How China's Leader Lost Faith in His Generals by Chris Buckley.
We are also analyzing the China Leadership Monitor, issue 83 from March 2025, which gives us this unprecedented look into the Ministry of State Security.
Oh, that one is fascinating. And then to understand how this internal posture projects outward, we are looking at the introduction to the book, Seeing China's Belt and Road by Edward Schatz and Rachel Sylvie.
Plus, we are grounding all of this in university source texts covering international relations theory, soft power, and foreign policy institutions.
Right, so we have a lot to cover. But the breadth of that material is necessary, right? Because the phenomenon we are exploring today, this sudden military purge, it's not isolated.
No, not at all. It is the visible symptom of a profound internal struggle that really dictates every single lever of statecraft in that country.
We are talking about the grand philosophical collision known as the red versus expert dilemma.
Exactly. And this tension dictates how promotions are handled, how intelligence is gathered, and ultimately how trillion-dollar global infrastructure projects are designed and executed.
So let's just start by defining our terms. Because to really grasp the magnitude of this dilemma, we have to establish the definitions operating in the minds of the leadership.
Right, because when we talk about red versus expert, we are not talking about, simple political leanings.
No, not at all. We are looking at a fundamental debate over what makes a state institution effective, secure, and capable of surviving in a pretty hostile world.
So red represents absolute, unquestioning political loyalty to the party line. It is strict ideological purity.
And complete submission to the paramount leader.
Yes, exactly. Whereas expertise represents specialized technical skill. It is operational readiness and the professional capability to actually execute complex tasks.
Like, running a modernized military.
Precisely. And the tension between those two poles is really the defining feature of modern Chinese history.
Okay, so let's walk through that history a bit. Because Chairman Mao Zedong firmly established the supremacy of red ideology, right?
He did. He codified the foundational principle that the party commands the gun.
The party commands the gun. That's a powerful phrase.
It is. For Mao, ideological fervor could overcome any material or technological deficiency.
But then, after his death, the country faced a bit of a reality check.
A massive one, yeah. Leaders like Deng Xiaoping and subsequently Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao recognized that ideological fervor does not, build functional supply chains.
Right, and it certainly does not operate modern naval fleets.
Exactly. They understood that to build a capable nation and a functional military, they desperately needed expertise.
So they started actively recruiting and elevating engineers, tacticians, economists, and professional bureaucrats.
And that pivot seems entirely logical, right? I mean, if the goal is to pull a massive agrarian society into the modern industrialized era.
Oh, absolutely. You need people who understand the physics of rocketry and the intricacies of global trade. You can't just ideology your way to a space program.
But the source texts highlight a severe unintended consequence of prioritizing that expertise.
Right, the corruption.
Yeah. As the military modernized under Deng Xiaoping and his successors, the focus on technical proficiency resulted in the military gaining a significant degree of operational autonomy.
Meaning they were kind of left alone to do their thing?
Pretty much. They were insulated from strict daily ideological oversight by civilian party members.
And in that isolated environment of massive defense budgets and minimal ideological scrutiny, staggering levels of corruption took root.
And the scale of that corruption cannot be overstated. I mean, we were
Right.
talking about a system where senior military ranks were allegedly bought and sold like commodities.
Wow. Like you could just buy a general star.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Logistics contracts were treated as personal fiefdoms, and operational readiness was routinely compromised by just rampant graft.
So, when Xi Jinping assumed power in 2012, he surveyed a military that possessed increasingly modern hardware, but was deeply compromised by this internal rot.
Exactly. And his immediate response was to launch a sweeping anti-corruption campaign.
The initial wave was really about cleaning house, wasn't it?
Yeah, removing the generals who had enriched themselves under the previous administrations of Jiang and Hu.
And then installing his own trusted officers who were tasked with completing the modernization of the forces.
Which brings us directly to the paradox of our opening hook.
Fast forward to the present day, Xi Jinping has spent over a decade installing his own hand-selected experts.
These are the individuals who oversaw the development of the rocket force, the naval expansion, the very people who built the modern hardware.
And yet he is now turning the purge on them.
He is. And the New York Times piece offers a really granular look at this through the downfall of General Zhang Yuxia.
Okay, yes, let's talk about him, because his profile is what makes this entire situation so shocking to me.
Yeah, General Zhang Yuxia was not some corrupt bureaucrat pushing papers.
Right. He was the top uniformed commander and a battle-tested veteran. I mean, he saw actual bloody frontline combat during the 1979 border war with Vietnam.
He did. He had immense credibility among the rank and file because of that.
And beyond his technical expertise, he possessed what, should have been an impenetrable political shield.
Right, his family ties.
Yes, he is the son of a revolutionary general who fought alongside Xi Jinping's own father.
And that combination, unquestionable combat experience and impeccable revolutionary lineage, it makes his ouster the ultimate signal to the rest of the command structure.
It really demonstrates that past performance, operational brilliance, and even deep familial ties are no longer sufficient to guarantee safety.
But the real insight comes from examining the individual chosen to replace this seasoned combat veteran.
General Zhang Shengmin.
Yes, the elevation of General Zhang Shengmin reveals the ultimate priority of the state right now.
Because General Zhang Shengmin possesses virtually no operational military experience in deploying forces or managing complex combat logistics, right?
Correct. His career in the rocket force was spent as a political commissar.
Which, when you look at the structure of a political commissar, the role is essentially an internal inquisitor.
It is. The job is not to figure out how to bypass enemy air defenses.
The job is to ensure that the officers figuring out how to bypass those defenses are perfectly aligned with the party's ideological mandates.
Exactly. And the sources even make a point to mention that General Zhang Shengmin is known for his dedication to Chinese brush calligraphy.
Which is just such a stark contrast to a veteran of a brutal border war.
It really is.
It feels like watching a championship-caliber football team fire their seasoned head coach the night before the Super Bowl, only to replace him with the team's public relations director.
That is a great analogy.
So how does the leadership rationalize this? Because putting an ideological investigator in charge of a highly technical, modern military apparatus seems like a guaranteed way to sacrifice operational capability.
Well, that paradox only exists if you believe there is a trade-off between loyalty and capability.
Oh, interesting. So they don't see a trade-off.
No, the crucial realization is that the current leadership fundamentally rejects that premise.
Okay, unpack that for me. How do they view it?
To understand their worldview, we need to analyze the historical significance of the 2014 meeting in Gushin, which the text emphasizes heavily.
Right, bringing hundreds of senior military officers to Gushin was a calculated piece of political theater.
It was. Gushin is the exact geographical location where Chairman Mao, back in 1929, solidified the doctrine that the party must exercise absolute control over the military.
So by summoning his generals there in 2014, the current leadership was issuing an unmistakable warning that the party's control had eroded.
Exactly. The message was that ideological decay had allowed brazen insubordination and corruption to flourish.
And the details from that Gushin meeting provide a really chilling look at the state of readiness at the time.
Oh, absolutely.
The text references training exercises that were entirely fabricated, like situations where soldiers were using shovels and sticks to simulate weapons during drills.
Right, while officers likely pocketed the funds intended for the actual training.
To a Western military analyst, a unit practicing with shovels is a failure of logistics, right? Or a failure of funding or basic military discipline.
Sure, but the source texts suggest the leadership views this completely differently.
They don't see it as a logistical failure at all.
No, they see it as a manifestation of ideological impurity.
Wow. So it always comes back to ideology.
That is the core of the doctrine. In the leadership's analysis, if a missile silo is poorly maintained, or if a procurement officer accepts a bribe, it is not a technical error or a simple character flaw.
It is proof that the individual's belief in the party has faltered.
Exactly. Therefore, ideological alignment is not merely a nice addition to technical expertise.
It is the fundamental prerequisite for it.
Yes, a soldier or an officer cannot possibly be an effective expert if their mind is not entirely red.
And this philosophy was doubled down upon recently, wasn't it?
It was. After purging the top commander of the rocket force and the defense minister, the leadership brought the remaining commanders to Yan'an.
And Yan'an is another sacred site of Mao's revolution.
Right. So holding a meeting there was a clear directive for an even deeper, more severe campaign of political rectification.
The New York Times article actually notes that General Zhang Yuxia, the combat veteran who was ousted, attempted to push back against this hyper-focus on political purity.
He did. He reportedly argued that elevating an investigator with no combat experience to such a high operational level would make the military appear unserious as a fighting force to external adversaries.
So he was prioritizing the expert image of a lethal professional military.
And that exact argument was weaponized against him.
Wait, really? How?
He was accused of trampling on the chairman responsibility system.
The chairman responsibility system, let's define that.
It is the bureaucratic and legal mechanism designed to cement the paramount leader's absolute, unquestioned authority over every facet of the armed forces.
So it completely eradicates any space for dissenting professional opinions.
Exactly. When a trusted confidant and decorated veteran is ousted for violating this system, it sends a massive shockwave through the entire institution.
It communicates that any pushback, even if based on sound military doctrine, will be interpreted as treasonous insubordination.
Yes. And if the leader is willing to decapitate his own military command structure to root out this ideological impurity, he clearly needs an incredibly robust apparatus to monitor that purity.
He needs eyes and ears everywhere to find the ideological decay before it manifests as a military failure.
And that level of pervasive paranoia necessitates a civilian intelligence apparatus of a scale human history has never really seen.
Which seamlessly transitions our focus from the military sphere directly to the enforcers of this ideology, the Ministry of State Security.
The Ministry of State Security is essentially the civilian sword and shield of the party.
And historically, it operated in the deepest shadows, right?
It did. It rarely appeared in official state media. Its leadership kept a very low profile, and its internal mechanics were highly opaque.
But the China Leadership Monitor text details a massive paradigm shift in recent years.
Yes, under the direction of Minister Chen Yexin.
The Ministry of State Security has taken on a highly visible, almost aggressive public profile under him, projecting its power not just in the shadows, but in daily life.
And to help you, the listener, visualize the sheer, staggering magnitude of this organization, the source text cites intelligence historian Calder Walton.
This number blew my mind.
It is incredible. Based on information sourced from an anonymous official within the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Ministry of State Security employs an estimated 800,000 personnel.
800,000. Imagine the entire population of a major metropolitan city like Seattle or San Francisco, and every single resident is an active intelligence officer, analyst, or domestic monitor.
The historical comparison provided in the text truly contextualizes that number.
Right, they compare it to the KGB.
Yeah, during the darkest, most paranoid days of the Cold War, the Soviet Union's State Security Committee was globally feared as the ultimate surveillance state.
And at the absolute peak of its power, the Soviet apparatus employed roughly 480,000 people.
So the Ministry of State Security is nearly double the size of the peak Soviet intelligence machine.
The historian quoted in the text actually suggests the scale makes previous Soviet efforts appear almost low energy.
He characterizes the current Chinese apparatus as the Soviet Union on steroids.
The mandate for an agency that massive must be incredibly broad.
Oh, it is. They are tasked with state security, aggressive counterintelligence, domestic political security, pervasive internal surveillance.
And expansive foreign intelligence operations too, right?
Yes, which encompass both traditional human intelligence networks and massive cyber espionage operations.
But, an organization of 800,000 intelligence officers naturally creates a terrifying bureaucratic dynamic.
How do you mean?
Well, A machine designed to root out disloyalty requires a constant stream of disloyalty to justify its massive budget, its unchecked power, and its continued existence.
I see what you're saying.
It seems inherently designed to foster a self-fulfilling culture of intense national paranoia.
That dynamic is actually the defining feature of the comprehensive state security concept, a framework formally promulgated by the leadership in 2014.
The comprehensive state security concept, the term comprehensive is vital here, isn't it?
It is because it represents the complete doctrinal erasure of the line, separating internal domestic issues from external foreign threats.
So in traditional Western governance, a local labor dispute or an environmental protest is viewed as a domestic political issue to be managed by local authorities.
Right. But under the comprehensive state security concept, the state views the risk of internal destabilization as inextricably linked to foreign subversion.
When the text breaks down that concept, it fundamentally alters how we view local events.
It really does. Give an example of how that plays out.
Well, if a factory town in a rural province protests over a polluted water supply, the security apparatus does not view it merely as a group of angry citizens with a legitimate domestic grievance.
No, the foundational assumption of the Ministry of State Security is that foreign intelligence agencies are pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Right, that they are funding the organizers and utilizing the local grievance to subvert the nation from within.
And the text explicitly notes that the leadership is deeply convinced that domestic civil movements are backed by external hostile support.
Because of that conviction, the surveillance targets are just incredibly expansive.
They monitor everything. The Ministry of State Security aggressively monitors foreign nationals operating within the country, business executives, journalists, academics.
They intensely surveil populations from Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau.
They track domestic distance, human rights lawyers, and religious and ethnic minorities.
Every sector of society is viewed as a potential vector for foreign ideological infection.
And connecting this massive civilian apparatus back to the military purges we discussed earlier paints a cohesive, albeit pretty grim, picture of the state.
It really does. The Ministry of State Security represents the ultimate manifestation of the red enforcement tool.
We have to assume that ideological inquisitors within the military, like General Zhang Shengmin, are highly integrated with this broader civilian intelligence network.
Right. They are utilizing the pervasive surveillance technologies like monitoring digital communications, tracking the financial flows of military officers and their extended families.
And analyzing social associations to preemptively identify disloyalty.
The entire state machinery operates under the singular assumption that external infiltration by hostile nations and internal ideological rot are essentially the exact same disease.
And if the disease is omnipresent, the cure must be continuous, unyielding ideological rectification.
There is no endpoint where the state feels completely secure.
Exactly. So having explored how this hyper-vigilant, internally focused, red versus expert dynamic hollows out military leadership and fuels an 800,000-strong security apparatus.
The next logical question is how a system this consumed by internal loyalty interacts with the rest of the globe.
Right, which requires a deep analysis of the institutions that execute foreign policy.
Before we look at the specific ministries, the source texts provide a foundational definition of Chinese foreign policy.
It is categorized as a comprehensive collection of external activities, diplomatic statements, and economic maneuvers designed to actively influence the international political and economic environment.
And the ultimate goal is to shape the behavior of other international actors to align with specific state principles and interests.
The text actually highlights a formal statement by Minister Wang Yi on this.
Yes, he asserts that the nation follows an independent foreign policy of peace, ostensibly anchored in the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence.
Those 5 principles are mutual respect for sovereignty, non-aggression, non-interference in internal affairs, equality, and peaceful coexistence.
But those are just the outward-facing diplomatic talking points, right?
Yeah. The university texts argue that to truly understand the strategic culture animating these institutions, one must look at the specific ideological modifications Chairman Mao made to traditional Marxist theory.
This philosophical deviation is a massive paradigm shift. It directly explains their modern worldview.
It does. Let's break down traditional orthodox Marxism first, as outlined in the texts.
Okay, so traditional Marxism posited that the development of technology and the modes of production are the fundamental forces that shape human relations and drive historical progression.
Right. Marx argued that society evolves through different stages, like capitalism moving toward socialism, based on technological and industrial advancement.
So in that view, technology is the engine of history.
Exactly. But Mao radically inverted that concept.
He did. His variation on Marxist theory championed people over technology.
He believed that human willpower, ideological cohesion, and the mass mobilization of a dedicated populace could overcome any technological disadvantage or historical law.
And that belief is not just abstract theory. It is the foundational mythos of the state, forged in the fires of their civil war.
Because Mao witnessed the success of this doctrine firsthand.
Right. During the protracted battles against the technologically superior Japanese forces, and later against the Nationalist Army, his forces relied on irregular, asymmetric guerrilla warfare.
They were consistently outgunned, lacking modern artillery and air support, but they emerged victorious.
And they attributed that victory entirely to the ideological commitment and sheer willpower of the mobilized peasants.
This historical experience hardwired the belief that a unified, ideologically pure collective is inherently superior to advanced technology.
When you combine that profound belief in ideological supremacy with what the text identifies as a deeply ingrained culture of historical grievance, you get a highly defensive and suspicious strategic posture.
The historical grievance is crucial to understand. The source texts detail how the legacy of the century of humiliation dominates their strategic thinking.
The century of humiliation was a period marked by devastating military defeats and unequal treaties imposed by Western imperial powers and Japan in the 19th and 20th centuries.
Right. And because of that, the state views international relations not as a neutral playing field, but as a historical struggle to regain rightful sovereignty.
And to prevent any further foreign encroachment or humiliation.
Exactly. Which brings us to the actual physical institutions tasked with navigating that hostile international environment.
The most crucial concept the texts present here is the deliberate, complex duality between the Communist Party and the state government.
It is a structure specifically designed to ensure that pragmatic diplomacy never overrides ideological imperatives.
To conceptualize this, imagine a massive, sprawling corporate structure.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The board of directors, in this case, the uppermost echelon of the Communist Party, dictates the grand, overarching strategy entirely behind closed doors.
And below them, you have the middle management.
Exactly. The formal state institutions, primarily the State Council, which oversees the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Commerce.
But these state ministries do not create the grand strategy.
No, they're merely tasked with figuring out the complex logistics to execute the board's directives.
So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs operates strictly within that middle management capacity.
Right, and the texts delineate three specific roles for them. The first role is policy interpretation.
Because the grand strategic directives are formulated at the very top, often within highly secretive bodies like the Foreign Affairs Leading Small Group.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs receives these broad mandates and is responsible for the tactical implementation.
They must interpret the strategy and draft the specific policy guidelines, talking points, and diplomatic maneuvers required to bring the strategy to life.
So, if the paramount leader decides the grand strategy is to isolate a specific nation diplomatically, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs does not question the strategy.
Right. Their job is just to figure out which ambassadors need to be summoned, which trade agreements should be subtly delayed,
and what specific language to use in international forums to achieve that isolation. They are the tactical executors of the Red Vision.
Their second role is policy control. But the texts highlight a significant limitation on their authority here.
Oh, this part is fascinating. The central leadership, the highest-ranking members of the party, insists on personally micromanaging bilateral relationships with any country deemed to have critical strategic importance.
Which is a lot of countries. This includes managing relations with global powers like the United States, Russia, and Japan.
Strategically vital regions like the Middle East.
And all critical border states, including North Korea, Vietnam, India, and Pakistan.
That leaves a surprisingly narrow lane of true autonomy for the diplomatic professionals.
It really does. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is essentially relegated to independently managing policies only for minor states that fall outside those high-priority strategic categories.
For the major geopolitical chess pieces, the ministry is merely facilitating the moves dictated by the paramount leader.
The third role, outlined in the texts, is information gathering.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs acts as an expansive intelligence filter.
They conduct policy research, analyze global trends, and heavily rely on state media apparatuses like the new China agency, to translate foreign reports and gauge international sentiment.
And then they package this information to feed it back up the chain of command, ensuring the central leadership has the data required to formulate the next grand strategy.
To truly understand how this duality of party and state functions in reality, we really have to look at the career of Minister Wang Yi.
Yes, the text explicitly notes that he wears a triple hat.
He holds concurrent positions that bridge the gap between the ideological board of directors and the state middle management.
He serves as the foreign minister, which is the highest formal state role for diplomacy.
But simultaneously, he sits as a member of the powerful Politburo and acts as the director of the Office of the Central Foreign Affairs Commission.
Both of which are incredibly elite, high-ranking party roles.
So Wang Yi's triple hat is the ultimate mechanism of control.
By holding the top state diplomatic position while simultaneously holding the senior party roles that oversee that very state apparatus, he ensures there is absolutely zero friction.
Zero friction between the ideological dictates of the party and the diplomatic actions of the state.
He is the living embodiment of the red imperative controlling the expert diplomatic machinery.
The university texts also provide a really fascinating layer of analysis regarding how the personal career backgrounds of top leaders subtly influence these grand policy decisions.
Right, because it points out that the highest-ranking officials did not all take the same path to power.
Many climbed the administrative ladder through regional and provincial party routes, perhaps serving for decades as the party secretary of a specific, rapidly industrializing province.
Others may have ascended strictly through the bureaucratic ranks of specific state ministries, like the Ministry of Commerce or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Or even through the intelligence apparatus.
And those varying career paths cultivate distinct perspectives and entrenched loyalties, right?
Absolutely. The text suggests that a leader who spent 30 years driving domestic economic growth and foreign investment in a coastal manufacturing hub will inherently view foreign policy through the lens of trade stability and economic integration.
They will prioritize policies that keep shipping lanes open and foreign capital flowing.
Conversely, a leader whose entire career was forged within the Ministry of State Security or the military will naturally view the international environment through a highly suspicious zero-sum security lens,
prioritizing ideological defense and hard power over economic pragmatism.
Yet despite those differing backgrounds and the internal debates they might generate, every single leader operates under the crushing weight of the chairman responsibility system.
And the overarching demand for absolute loyalty to the center.
So we have thoroughly mapped the internal architecture.
We have. We've seen how the demand for ideological purity purges military experts, how it requires an 800,000-strong domestic security apparatus to monitor the population, and how it strictly controls the diplomatic corps.
The final piece of the puzzle is projecting the system outward.
How does a nation so consumed by internal ideological control and historical grievances attempt to alter the behavior of other sovereign nations?
This brings us to the theoretical concepts of power projection.
Specifically examining soft power and the massive infrastructure campaign known as the Belt and Road Initiative.
The university source texts rely heavily on the foundational theories of political scientist Joseph Nye to establish what power actually means in the context of international relations.
Nye defines power very simply. It is the ability to alter the behavior of other actors to achieve your desired outcomes.
And he categorizes the methods of achieving this into three distinct buckets: coercion, payments, and attraction.
The first two are highly tangible, right? Coercion is the application of sticks, like utilizing military threats, naval blockades, or punishing economic sanctions to force another nation to change its behavior out of fear.
Payments are the application of carrots, offering direct financial aid, highly favorable trade deals, or access to massive consumer markets to buy compliance.
But soft power, the third bucket, operates entirely on the principle of attraction.
Soft power is the ability to influence others through the inherent appeal of your culture, your political values, or your foreign policies.
It is achieved when other nations genuinely want to emulate your society, or willingly conform to the principles you espouse, without needing to be threatened with a stick or bribed with a carrot.
It is the power of persuasion through admiration.
The sources provide several classic, enduring examples of how the United States has historically projected soft power.
They highlight initiatives like the Voice of America, which broadcasted news and cultural programming globally during the Cold War, promoting democratic values.
They point to the Fulbright program, which fosters deep educational and cultural exchange by bringing foreign scholars to American universities.
And a prime example is the Peace Corps, established by executive order in 1961, which deployed American volunteers globally to assist with local needs while fostering organic, people-to-people understanding.
The text also notes the role of the United States Agency for International Development in providing humanitarian assistance.
And it even acknowledges the immense attractive power of American cultural exports, movies, music, and the global ubiquity of American fast food.
Joseph Nye argues that a nation's soft power can be quantified and measured by analyzing diplomatic resources, tracking the global reach of cultural exports, and utilizing public opinion polling across different nations to gauge attractiveness over time.
And the source texts explicitly contrast these American efforts with the modern Chinese approach to cultivating soft power.
The primary vehicle highlighted in the texts for Chinese cultural attraction is the network of Confucius Institutes.
These institutes, which are heavily affiliated with the Ministry of Education, are embedded in universities and schools worldwide, offering subsidized Chinese language instruction and cultural resources.
Additionally, they utilize immense scholarship programs specifically designed to bring promising future leaders, politicians, and academics from target countries to study at national universities.
The aim is to cultivate a sympathetic worldview among future global elites.
Furthermore, the texts point to the recent creation of the China International Development Cooperation Agency, an institution explicitly designed to streamline and strengthen the strategic planning of foreign aid distribution.
But the official mandates for these cultural and aid initiatives consistently link back to one central defining project.
Right. The press release for the China International Development Cooperation Agency explicitly stated its primary purpose was to contribute to the successful execution of the Belt and Road Initiative.
This initiative is the absolute centerpiece of their global outreach, and understanding it is critical to understanding their foreign policy.
The Belt and Road Initiative is just monumental in scope.
It is. The texts describe it as a massive trillion-dollar program focused on development assistance and global infrastructure financing.
Officially announced in 2013, it is a highly coordinated, cross-agency mission involving the National Development and Reform Commission, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Commerce.
And the stated public objective is to dramatically enhance regional economic and cultural connectivity across the globe.
The execution of the Belt and Road Initiative relies on two massive pillars.
The first pillar is hard physical infrastructure. We are talking about financing and constructing deep-water ports, sprawling railway networks, massive highway systems, high-speed rail lines, extensive fiber-optic cable networks.
And basic societal infrastructure like hospitals, schools, and energy grids across roughly 70 participating countries, primarily in the developing world.
The second pillar focuses on economic integration.
Seeking to bind these newly connected nations through comprehensive trade agreements, streamlined customs protocols, massive foreign direct investment, and coordinated financial policies.
And they are not just looking across land masses, they are looking toward the poles.
Yes, the text highlights the development of the Polar Silk Road.
They are actively planning to capitalize on melting Arctic ice to establish significantly shorter maritime trade routes to Europe,
while simultaneously securing access to untapped natural resources and bolstering strategic partnerships with Russia.
But looking at the sheer scale of the Belt and Road Initiative raises a profound theoretical question regarding Joseph Nye's categories.
It really does. If a nation arrives in a developing country and offers to finance and build a multi-billion-dollar railway system or a massive deep-water port, is that truly soft power?
Right, because soft power relies on cultural admiration and shared values.
Building a port feels significantly less like sharing a culture of peaceful coexistence and much more like dropping an incredibly heavy, multi-billion-dollar parrot made of concrete and sovereign debt onto the negotiating table.
That specific ambiguity is the center of intense debate among international relations scholars.
The text from Schatz and Sylvie notes that the scale and ambition of the Belt and Road Initiative have effectively polarized global observers into two distinct, irreconcilable narratives regarding its true intent.
The texts categorize these as the utopian narrative and the dystopian narrative.
The utopian narrative is the official perspective vigorously promoted by state-controlled media and diplomatic corps.
It frames the massive infrastructure push as a genuinely win-win form of new, inclusive international development.
It is presented as a benevolent project open to all nations, built on the foundation of mutual respect and designed to bring desperately needed prosperity, industrialization, and job opportunities to developing nations.
Developing nations that have been historically ignored by Western financial institutions.
But then there's the dystopian narrative.
Right, which is heavily prevalent within United States policy and defense circles. They view the entire enterprise through a lens of profound suspicion.
In this view, the Belt and Road Initiative is not a benevolent development program, but a highly calculated expression of authoritarian expansionism.
It relies on the economic theory that financial power is fungible.
Meaning, when a state possesses massive economic leverage, that financial weight can be directly and efficiently converted into geostrategic political power.
To put that into a concrete scenario, if you finance and construct a massive deepwater port in a developing nation that cannot possibly service the immense debt incurred, you are not just building infrastructure.
You are purposefully engineering a sovereign debt trap.
Exactly. When the nation defaults, you gain operational control of the port, creating a dual-use facility that can potentially service naval vessels.
So you have effectively bought a sphere of influence and cemented a long-term strategic dependency.
That is the core fear outlined in the dystopian view.
For international relations theorists focused on power transitions, specifically the potential decline of the existing hegemon, the United States, and the rise of a powerful challenger, the Belt and Road Initiative is interpreted as a sophisticated, non-kinetic instrument
designed to fundamentally rewire the architecture of the global economy.
The goal is to gradually unseat the United States and reorient global trade and political loyalty toward their own center, achieving global dominance without ever firing a shot in direct military conflict.
Which brings us back to the challenge of categorizing this behavior.
Right. If building a port using sovereign debt is not purely the cultural attraction of soft power, and it does not involve the direct military threats of traditional hard power, how do theorists classify the Belt and Road Initiative?
The university texts introduce a vital hybrid concept to address this: smart power.
Smart power is the highly calibrated strategic combination of hard military coercion and soft economic or cultural attraction to achieve national objectives.
The texts provide an excellent comparative example of this by analyzing the state's behavior in different maritime theaters.
The analysis of the East China Sea is fascinating.
It is. The text points out that in that specific region, the state relies heavily on a smart power approach.
They project undeniable hard power by continuously scaling up their military and naval presence, frequently conducting aggressive patrols to assert territorial claims.
Yet, simultaneously, they carefully maintain massive, deeply integrated diplomatic and economic trade ties with nations like Japan.
They're wielding the stick of naval presence while constantly offering the massive economic carrot of their consumer market.
The text contrasts that delicate balance with their posture in the South China Sea, where the analysis suggests the approach relies almost entirely on the unilateral application of hard power.
Right. Militarizing artificial islands and using Coast Guard vessels to physically coerce neighbors, largely abandoning the nuance of smart power.
And the Belt and Road Initiative operates precisely in this complex, ambiguous space between economics and geopolitics.
It is undeniably providing an economic lifeline to nations lacking basic infrastructure, but it is also clearly a calculated mechanism for strategic restructuring.
It is an incredibly intricate web of interconnected philosophies, fears, and institutions.
As we draw this deep dive into the source texts to a close, let's trace the massive arc we have covered today.
We began by investigating a startling paradox, a superpower actively purging its most capable, battle-tested military experts.
We discovered that this is not administrative chaos, but a deliberate feature of a system that views technical expertise as inherently dangerous if it is not subordinated to absolute, unquestioning red ideological loyalty.
We followed that demand for absolute loyalty into the domestic sphere, unpacking the staggering scale of an 800,000-strong Ministry of State Security.
We saw how the comprehensive state security concept erases the line between domestic grievances and foreign subversion, creating a self-sustaining cycle of pervasive surveillance and national paranoia.
We mapped the dual architecture of the foreign policy institutions, observing how pragmatic diplomats in the State Council and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs are tightly constrained by the ideological directives of the party leadership.
We explored how historical grievances and Mao's doctrine of people over technology create a highly defensive strategic culture.
Finally, we analyzed how this hyper-controlled system projects its power globally, bypassing traditional soft power in favor of the trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative.
We examined how this massive application of infrastructure financing and smart power sparks intense global debate over whether it represents utopian development or dystopian debt-driven expansionism.
Synthesizing all of these moving parts leaves us with a critical, lingering question.
We have observed a massive state apparatus prioritizing ideological purity over specialized expertise across every sector, from the commanders of hypersonic missile forces to the diplomats negotiating international treaties.
The provocative question to consider is this.
If a global superpower successfully roots out all pragmatic, operational experts in favor of a monolithic core of ideological loyalists, does that unified mindset make the state machinery an unstoppable, invincible force?
Or does the eradication of diverse expertise guarantee that the entire system will eventually grind to a disastrous halt under the crushing weight of its own ideology?
It is a profound question to keep in mind as these policies continue to shape the international order. Thank you for joining us as we unpacked these critical texts, and we look forward to exploring more complex dynamics with you on the next deep dive.